some meaningful notes afterwards, a blog post. I'll share the slides by Richard as well. And with that said, welcome everybody. Really happy to have you with us. Over to you, Richard.
Well, thanks everyone for your time. I actually really a big fan of this topic. I think when we talk about AI, it's easy to get lost in how do we responsibly and technically enable it. There's a lot of discussion on like what it can do. There's this jagged frontier where we're all discovering, what the newest AI in the workplace is capable of and how people are using it. But I actually think this really big focus on what is value, what is changing around value? How do we address the value discussion, whether it's at the leadership level, whether it's at the individual level, I think is something we need to spend a lot more energy on. And it's where I've seen the biggest challenges. I've been very lucky in my work, over 100 AI transformation projects, lots and lots of Microsoft 365 Copilot deployments with customers, lots of much smarter people than myself in our teams and at customers where I've got to learn from. And so I hope to try and extract a lot of that, jam it together into a bit of content for you today. Now, I do talk quickly. I'm very excited. And what I'll do is, as I go through this, we'll have the recording, you'll have all the slides, and you, of course, have access to me. And I always encourage this, but not everyone takes advantage of it. I am super friendly, as Julian and Yanis and others know. Like, if you want to have a chat, I'd be happy to do it. It's a great way to break up my day and also to learn from you what you're thinking about AI, where you are in your journey. And it doesn't matter where you are in your journey. There's always interesting insights I get from those. So abuse my generosity, and please reach out if you have more questions about this after, or you just want to talk about, have a sounding board for some of the things you've been thinking about. So with that, I'll dive right in. So I've got a few sections for today, but the overall premise that I want to talk about is this idea of what we feel good about at work. And most of us, when we think of work when it feels best, we think about passion. We think of like passio, the root of that, which is to suffer for something meaningful. And the thing with work is that feels good when you're doing something that feels valuable, when you feel valued by others, when you feel like your work has value, and a bunch of other things to unpack in that statement. So that's what I want to emphasize today. Like, how do we make sure that AI is doing this and not the opposite, making us feel devalued, making our skills and our outputs, or even our role and the impact we have in our work feel devalued, which is a very real risk as we go through this transformation. So I'll start with something where I think we're probably all in agreement, and it probably is an easy way to start, which is like, where are we at in the industry and what's happening? And I think it's really important to understand that this is a big transformation. We call these exponential shifts, and it is a transformative technology that's generally applicable. So if you think of some other eras of technology, like the PC era, and this is just with a focus on communication, but it changed how we worked, right? It changed how we communicate. It changed that in a big way, generally for everyone. Now that happened over decades. In similar vein with the internet era, we had, it took, 5+ years before we had Wi-Fi in a bunch of places. So there's a lot of reasons why these things were delayed, and it gave us more time to address, to adapt, and to change. But I think no one would question that each of these eras, before and after, the way we work has drastically changed. And also what we value in the context of work, in our work products, also has changed. So this is, again, a big transformational change. The difference, and this is really important, is that it'll be measured in years, not decades, and it'll be years if we're lucky. And so you're seeing this really heightened sensitivity around how fast this change is happening. And you've probably seen it yourself or felt it yourself. So it's really important to understand that. Now, the second reason it's important is because we're still figuring out, it's a jagged edge. We're still figuring out what is that change. Right now, the perception, at least that I've generally gotten, is that it's the removal of skill barriers. So essentially uplifting people's skills and knowledge in a way that the internet kind of uplifted knowledge, but in a way that allows everyone to compete in a more similar way, which is very impactful. And then a spread of hyper-personalization and all the things that comes with that. So what do we want to think about then in a different, let's take a step back. What does this mean for organizations? What it means is when you have an exponential technology, it's not linear. And linear is kind of a false narrative. So what happens is we think of technology shifts and they're kind of steps, right? So, in the pandemic, great example, some companies had already planned on hybrid work and were further along in their journey. And so when the pandemic came, it was like a wall, because now everyone had to be hybrid work efficient. And so you had this big shift, right? You had this vertical climb that was really hard for a lot of organizations. So that was a big step. Some organizations had a little bit of a smoother step than others. Some had a much more vertical. Everyone was digitally first responding, right? Because we were all reacting to it. And when we did that, we allowed ourselves to kind of step up. And generally, we're in a better place after the pandemic, at least from a digital footprint, than we were before, both in skills and capabilities and more. And similarly, this is how we've always had it. We've always had these steps. Some are big steps, some are small steps. But if you take a step back, you look back, from a further view, you'll see that it kind of looks linear. And AI is an exponential curve. So it's not the same. It's not the same as hybrid work. It's not the same as these other models. What this is it's a wall that's coming like hybrid work in the pandemic, except unlike the pandemic, we can see it coming. So we have a role as leaders or people who influence executives, especially executives, to understand that this is a shift where technologists alone shouldn't be leading it for so many reasons, both internally, societally, and more. So we need to lean in. And how do we do that? We have to figure out what a bridging strategy is. How do we get from where we are today to where we need to be in order to be competitive, to be servicing our customers or constituents better, to achieve better educational outcomes or patient outcomes or whatever it is that your organization is centered around. And so there's lots of ways we can bridge this gap, right? Scaling security and governance and these types of things that AI really actually both helps and also accelerates. You've got digital assistants, which we'll talk about, like co-pilots. You've got intelligent services and how they're being added into traditional ERP or CRM systems or things like that. You've got employee experiences need to be highly proactive and personalized compared to what we've been doing, and more and more and more, like champions, communities, centers of excellence, and even just like modernizing, getting a legacy. All these things are needed in order for us to be able to take full advantage and to benefit from this AI wave that is actively happening right now. And you might have differences of opinion on where you need to be by, say, 2025. Maybe you think you need to be at the D, maybe you think you're down here. But the difference that's important is that either way, you need to start doing more to bridge, because if you wait, the impact, just like many organizations felt during the pandemic, if you hadn't invested in things like hybrid work, is going to be much more pronounced. It's going to be a steeper climb, not just for IT or HR leaders or multidisciplinary groups that are trying to support these transformations, but even for individuals, employees in the organization. It's really unfortunate that they're going to have to do a really steep climb on their own, a lot of times without support if we don't start to invest in these things proactively. So this is the executive discussion, and I hope that these visuals will help you kind of reframe that narrative internally. But as I kind of look forward, if I take this all together, what I'm really saying is when we think about AI today, we have to embrace it sooner because we have years. And if we don't, there's all sorts of consequences that are significant. And that's the big thing, is a lot of times I'll talk to leaders and you get a mix of, we all have differences in shared understanding. And so, of course, we can't get shared agreement on how we should address this AI change or its priority. So the first thing we need to do is start to make sure we're using consistent language to talk about this and talk about how we're bridging the gap and why it's so critical, and at least agree on some of these principled ideas. Once you have that, you're in a better position to start leading. So that's my first comment on AI. And with that, I'll pause as I get ready for the next one, where we talk about how our actual org is transforming. Any questions or commentary from the team?
I think so far so good. You teased us with a slide on LinkedIn. I'm curious to see when we get there.
That's the fourth section if we get there, but I can jump around too. You guys let me know if you're having a pain point you want to make sure we dig into that on this call.
And I'll do my very best to moderate the chat, but in the interest of time, Richard, let's take the next one here.
Awesome. So the other big thing to understand is that we're failing, and I mean this in a like, let's all own it. In the marketplace, across industries, organizations are failing. And the reason you can see this, and this is data from earlier this year, but there's really new, interesting data that shows it's more pronounced. People are bringing their own AI to work. And the reason people are bringing their own AI, and it's not like, oh, it's just Gen Z or it's just millennials, like people are bringing their own AI to work, period. And they're doing it because it has a very significant impact. It helps them. They know it's a competitive advantage. And we'll talk more about that and unpack that later. But it's really important to understand that. So why is this happening? Well, the problem with this isn't that people are bringing their own AI to work. The problem is that organizations aren't providing what employees need to manage this AI transformation, especially at the line of business leader level and not necessarily in IT and HR and other groups or marketing, but in like specifically core business areas. And so I think that's something that we need to just accept. We're not doing a good enough job. We need to move faster. That's going back to that embrace, that curve. Most organizations aren't doing a good enough job here. And specifically, I'm emphasizing the generalized digital assistants at scale. So let me put this in a different perspective. We're talking about value. Let's talk about what gives you your value advantage. And I think generally people agree on this principle, right? If we think about our organization, we think about our data, our processes, and our people, and those things together are multiplies, and that gives us our value advantage over another organization. But differentiated value is a little different. So differentiated value actually doesn't sit in capital P processes. It sits in lowercase p processes. Let me give you an example. If you're an insurance org and I have another insurance org, you might both have different versions of SAP, let's say, for ERP systems, but you both have very similar capital P processes. That's important, right? That's not really a competitive advantage. What you have is between this ERP system and the CRM system, between when the person creates a shipping order and then it gets put on the truck. Between that time, there's all these exceptions. And all those exceptions are actually where your competitive advantage lies. And your people bridge these exceptions. Your people bridge between ERP and CRM or customer experience and you name it. And they do that almost universally with collaboration and productivity tools like Microsoft 365. So we do it with Teams and meetings. We create business documents. We do all those things. So think about this for a second. Most of us, I think, generally feel that the organization values ERP investments and customer experience investments and things like that. What we find is they struggle to value modern work investments. Yet, modern work, or what you ever want to call it, these lowercase p processes, are the strategic differentiator for your organization. And AI makes it accessible, unlike any technology before it, in near limitless ways, accessible to digitize, improve, and optimize that, extend and automate it. So what we're really saying is, it's not just about traditional data that's highly valuable. Think of structured data. It's all this unstructured data can be modernized, brought into AI, made accessible to AI. We can then extend and automate processes, lowercase p processes that are actual competitive advantage. And we can do that through scaling people, which isn't just about getting them to use AI, but getting them to continue to improve their usage, continuing to build a new baseline that we're building off of for more productivity gains, more quality gains. And the nice thing is AI is an exponential technology, so it keeps giving new capabilities and new ways to do that. This is a really important thing to take away. It's about lowercase p processes and this idea that the value in our organization is unlocked in people and these, relatively informal sometimes processes and ways in which they work. And if you can get people to agree at that at a leadership level as a strategic differentiator, everything else becomes a lot easier. So if you can't get that, here's some more ammunition to help you with that. Right now, if you implement something like Microsoft 365 Copilot, you're going to get a pretty good return on investment. You just do it responsibly. You set up DLP. There's some IT work here, but if you do it in the right way and you enable it correctly, you'll get return. What happens is when you invest in something, and by the way, if you want some guidance on that, I've got webinars and material on that. If you invest in that on the adoption side, you get what we believe is a compounding return. So from what we've seen, evidence-wise, we see that light investments, especially programmatic and proactive ones, think of communities, champion programs, think of how you do bring your own learning experiences, enabling people to share more around how they're learning about AI in this transformation, and so much more. If you do these things well, what you end up finding is that your adoption benefit is cumulative. And this makes sense because, remember, even though people are getting more return over time because the technology is improving, what really unlocks that potential isn't responsible enablement, it's how people use it better. It's how we maximize that month over month, because there's a lot of new capabilities every single month. And then there's big sea changes, like with O1 and reasoning engines, or now officially, publicly, we can at least talk about deep think or thinking deeply with Copilot. Those capabilities allow even more scenarios. And so, again, this needs to be taken. It's not a project of, we're not just doing some training, we're not just doing, a one-off as we deploy this in a pilot and doing training there. It needs to be a continual model of sustainment and scaling on adoption. But that can be done really cost effectively. And when it's done, you get really significant compounding returns. Okay, so we get that. Most of you already agree with that. So let's then, again, if you want more guidance on that, I've got that as well as a bunch of slides I'll hide later. And so the other thing to think about is, what about this data discussion, data and processes? Remember, lowercase p processes is what I'm emphasizing here. So interestingly enough, I wish data was amazing because I'm a library sciences information architect. Like I love information and content and business documents, and folders are the F word, and metadata is awesome, but we all have to admit that they're valuable in both instances. So it's really cool and I like it, but the ROI is just not there. The real ROI isn't the data optimization, modernization, migration projects, et cetera, you're doing. It's how they unlock the ease of which you can now extend, automate, and improve processes. And this is really interesting. What we find is, yes, you need to do some programmatic things to help and proactively help the organization scale this particular hockey stick that we're seeing here on processes. But a lot of it is actually driven via line of business leads, is driven by those stakeholders in those business units, and not, and this is important, not by IT. It's not IT going out and saying, here's all the problems and here's how we're going to fix them. It's these people coming to them saying, I think AI can do this. Why can Copilot do this, et cetera? And I want to be clear, most of these problems aren't resolved by Copilot. They're resolved by other technology stack scenarios. Right now, we did a big meta assessment with 10 customers, thousands of requests from these pilots around like what I'd like AI to do. And it turns out 82% of them were solved by out-of-the-box capabilities or Power Platform or other tools right within their arsenal. They were best serviced by those needs. But that doesn't change the fact that what we're really seeing is that people have these digital needs that aren't being serviced, and IT is so focused on simplification, HR is so focused on simplification that they're not proactively listening, and this creates a new opportunity, arguably for a new area in the business, white space for careers, and of course for leaders to take on, where they become AI enablement and transformers that are really focusing on what IT and HR and other interdisciplinary groups can't do. Anyways, what does all this mean? It means that the current data that we have, and I wish I could share some of the internal data. I think we're not going to be able to because we got enough pushback with this composite research we did. It's a competitive advantage. No one wants to talk about it. So we're already seeing what we believe is a hockey stick. So let's talk about this visual that we talked about earlier. We're seeing right now, and I can at least verbally tell you this, that if you think of this exponential curve, we believe where you're going to find that is in process automation and lowercase p processes. And this is unlocked specifically through this mechanism of these digital assistants at scale. Sorry, there's a question there?
Yeah, so can you just remind us, like, what's lowercase p and uppercase p?
Lowercase p is like the people-based processes that are often poorly defined. They're not using necessarily structured data, and that often are very Microsoft 365 centric if you're a Microsoft org in terms of the technologies that you use in that process flow. I think that's probably a good way to describe it. And then these are quick analogies. There's actual industry research data on like what these terms are, but I didn't have time to dig into that on this call.
I'll flesh it out in the summary afterwards.
Absolutely. So let me put it a different way. If we agree that this is a way to achieve the advantage, and we've seen the data I've shown you is based on real data from customers. So then the question is, how do we put this all together in a single visual representation? And I think this is the closest I've been able to get. You can see there's a lot of text in the bottom, but just focus on the triangle. Today, most organizations are focusing on modern AI enablement, and that's fair. You're calculating productivity gains, you're achieving digital excellence, you're responsibly enabling it. This is not easy work, and it's probably the main focus for most organizations in 2024. However, in 2025, either at the beginning of the year or hopefully at the end of this year, we need to start focusing on digital assistance at scale. This allows us to achieve differentiated value, as I mentioned earlier. It allows us to start focusing on quality gains and quality measures versus productivity gains. It's a very different way of measuring it. It allows us to start to get into real departmental, not individual productivity gains, but departmental and role-based gains and quality gains. Those are really important distinctions. And it does, of course, mean we're going to use plugins and extensibility and other things like that. So why is this so important? Let me be really clear, and I'm going to be really bullish and aggressive even. In 2025, you're going to see functional agents or Copilot agents or whatever they call them. You're going to see agents in the media everywhere, because with the reasoning capabilities and with some of the other things, that's the next frontier that every one of these big organizations are spending a lot of money and energy on. And they've already been doing it, but like those will start to be hitting the market. You'll start to see them for marketing work. You're going to start to see it for sales and finance work and all their other types of verticalized scenarios. So as you start to see these functional agents come to market and be integrated in these products and more, you're going to feel a really increased demand. It's going to be more on that exponential curve. And your organization, if it doesn't have digital assistants at scale already, will really struggle to be able to take full advantage of that. Because it's hard today. We have real examples of customers where they're deploying these functional agents, and because they don't have digital assistants at scale, we have to do all this uplift on education, on adoption, on process understanding, on all these things, which is much, much easier if we already have some of this done. And we can see that improve where we have departments doing functional agents, but that department's been saturated with its teams using things like Microsoft 365 Copilot already. They're in a really good position where it's a much easier transition. So basically, I would say 2025, you're transitioning between these ones at the end of the year. And if you're not there, going back to our curve, you are definitely behind and you're going to have a higher, steeper curve. So that's my very strong opinion based on research in both academia and what we see in the marketplace. But, it's definitely, there's differences of opinion. I think for some are a lot less assertive in the speed of that. But I've so far been pretty correct. So I feel like this is my best interpretation of when we need to prepare. Now that's optimal. It's okay. We can always make anything work with enough ibuprofen and money, but it's worth understanding that risk. All right. So that's summarized with this really simple statement. We essentially need to deal with our digital debt, and we need to improve our experiences, especially how people learn and adapt to changes in digital technology. And we need to lead. If we're reactive in our organizations, we're going to be really struggling. And you can see, generally speaking, the industry is reactive right now, and that needs to change specifically, arguably before the end of the year. So your AI councils or whatever it is you're using as mechanisms to lead this charge, they need to start to take a much more proactive stance. And we'll talk more about other areas they need to focus on. All right. Questions there?
No, let's go, Richard.
All right. So we talked about value. Let's talk then about how it delivers value, specifically how it explains or extracts the value from us. So the first thing to understand is, I like this analogy because it works really well. When we think of executives and leaders, they had this privilege where they'd have executive assistants. And one of the easiest ways to lean into these technologies and in explaining it is to use the term assistant. Now, all employees, for a much lower cost, can have an assistant. The equivalent almost of an executive assistant, except potentially more limitless in terms of its capabilities on the technology side and so on and so forth. So that's an important distinction, and that's a big value proposition, and that should help more people focus on the work, right, that feels valuable, right? Because now we all have that privilege and advantage. Another way to think about this is each of us can use AI in different ways. So in a simple collaboration sequence like this, you might have someone suggesting ideas, and then you have two other people in that meeting who are taking those ideas and ranking them, and they're using AI to do that. And you have a fourth person who's taking those ideas and starting to build a backlog and figuring out like the work breakdown. And so you have different people in a highly collaborative meeting, all using AI in different ways to improve the experience. That's a really common pattern. And what this basically means is that the nature of collaboration with AI is going to keep evolving. Earlier this year, Microsoft announced Team Copilots. It would probably be called Copilot agents, but Copilot agents that are an active participant, not a passive one, within a context of, say, a meeting, or within the context of creating tasks and organizing and processing and creating summaries and execution activity around tasks in, say, Planner. These are all things that are actively happening right now that Microsoft is, as is Google and many others, are leading in the marketplace to show like how AI isn't just something you individually use, but can be used in a highly collaborative way and do more on your behalf. This is the early inklings of that functional agency that I mentioned earlier. And this gets further exemplified by the fact that now these prompts and the responses are becoming so valuable individually that we need ways to store them and reflect on them. Because if you've ever tried to use the chat history when you use these tools, it just gets buried really quickly. So now we need new ways in which we can store this, enter things like Copilot pages and experiences where we can store the responses from these, share those responses with others, and actively collaborate, not just on traditional business documents, but literally on how we work with AI. This is a great example, tangible example, entering the marketplace right now. It's in production. You can use it. I could demo it for you right now. That actually changes how people are working in positive ways. And again, exemplifies this really rapid pace of value and collaboration connectiveness around AI. To put all that in perspective, the number the number one and number two issues for most organizations is meetings suck, and the meetings suck because we have too many and they're inefficient. And what you think about, I want you to reflect on this. The way AI works is we see proven data, now public, at least I can disclose this one, that shows that you see a big reduction in meetings. Why is that happening? So many meetings are low value. I say, Yanis, you're really good at finding content in SharePoint. Can you help me find this? You're really good at building PowerPoint presentations. Can you help me with that? Now people are going to Copilot or other tools for that. It's helping them. That reduces the load on other people, but it also is complemented by more valuable, high-value collaboration interactions because we're all using AI, both as an agent and then individually within those meetings. So this is a really significant increase in value. And again, further emphasizes why I was mentioning earlier, it's really important to have these digital agents and assistants at scale. I have customers who've completely pivoted their AI strategy and roadmap with programs, and they've shifted a lot of emphasis on prioritizing digital assistants at scale because the return on investment is higher than almost any other investment we can do in 2024. So last comment, this also changes how we work and manage ourselves and manage others. So if you can ask a question like, what has this person been up to? What's this customer been up to? What's been happening here? And the AI agent can do all that work for you. That means that when you go and meet with that person, you can say, I think you've been doing this kind of work. Instead of me asking you like what you've been up to, I can say, I know we're going to have more of X. How do I help you prepare for that? What can I do? So it becomes a very different dialogue as managers. And this gets further exemplified by different ways you yourself can improve. So we're seeing, early signals in research and in evidence from customers, really interesting stories and more around how it's changing how leaders and managers and even individuals manage themselves, which also has another layer of added value from the productivity ones we've already mentioned. And then lastly, this is changing as well because one of the biggest challenges with these tools is if you ask it a question, it might not be able to answer it because it's generalized. It's looking at all your data, all your signals. Yet now, in the near future, we can create our own agents. This is in OneDrive and, of course, Copilot agents in SharePoint in the Microsoft world. And these are real. This is happening right now in this month for many customers. So you're going to actually see that people can quickly create an agent. They pick a few documents. They say, these are the documents that are going to power this agent experience. I create as my agent. I'm sharing it with others. I've crafted this agent. Let's say this is a drone launch. So people might have questions about what are we doing for prep for that. And now we've essentially created a way in which people can get specific targeted answers to specific patterns and questions. We're essentially using AI to extract more value from the content we've already produced, the hard work we've already done. We're getting more value out of it. And this is the tip of the iceberg. Go back to functional agents. What's going to happen is all these people who created all these agents are then going to think about what are those patterns where the agent can actually do things on my behalf. In this drone launch example, if I had more time, I'd actually show you it can do things like automatically schedule and send invites to people for the launch party. It can do all sorts of different things on your behalf because it understands the data and understands these other things. So half of the work's already done, and you just have this extra layer to explore either with IT or even as a technically savvy user can do. Again, lowercase d developer is not what this is. Any end user who understands their own data can create these things very quickly and easily. You're going to see proliferation, increased volume, variety, and velocity of agents all over the place. You have to prepare for this, which goes back to we need to be in a proactive employee experience state and much more to be successful here. All right, I won't go into all the details for that feature, but it's a good example, I think, of what I'm describing. So, the other one is there's a big gap in skills. Lower skilled people get a bigger benefit than higher skilled people. So this means there are designs for champion programs and more also need to reflect it. I'll stop there. Question?
Thanks, Richard. We're going to run out of time.
Yeah.
Surprise. Do you want to just show us that one slide that you teased?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's summarize some of the negatives. And I'll say the biggest negative is this. So the biggest negative on AI and how it could devalue it is that people feel insecure. So we talk about security and responsible enablement. It's very topical. Everyone talks about it, but we don't talk about insecurity enough and how organizations need to lean in and lead here. And there's a lot of reasons why there's this gap in people sharing. Remember, lots of people are using AI today and they're getting tons of value out of it because we see it in all sorts of different data signals, but they're not sharing it internally. They're not sharing it with their peers. They're not, surfacing it to leadership in the organization and more. And this is what we have to address because it's a very real challenge in organizations. And there's ways to address each of these types of concerns, but it requires us to both acknowledge that people are right and reasonable to feel insecure in their roles and with AI transformation, and that we need to directly address these, not with like platitudes, but real action. Like, here's how we're gonna enable this. This is why it's safe to use it in these circumstances, period. You're safe to use it when you use it in these ways. We need to start to be much more proactive in leading organizations through this insecurity pattern that we're seeing across organizations. And that's increased, by the way. Pandemic and hybrid work increased insecurity across organizations. The AI has like accelerated almost exponentially how much insecurity people feel. And you can think of this yourself, right? You know, we all value our intellectual prowess. And what is essentially happening is these AI systems are devaluing that economically and then eventually societally. And so that's hard to come to terms with if we don't think of it the right way. So instead of thinking of, you know, does our organization and does this AI principle value what we know, or does it value why you know what you know and how you know what you know? And it turns out it's those two, how you know what you know and why you know what you know, that matter much more. And that gives you a little bit more confidence, if we kind of break that out further, around how you might be able to scaffold the right strategy, both individually to kind of cope with this change and the insecurity it brings, as well as, you know, organizationally.
Great, Richard. That's all we had. Really appreciate it. Thanks for preparing all of this. I'll follow up with you also on the questions we had in the chat on the source of RI that clients identify. But for now, I'll just say a big thank you, Richard. Thanks for getting all of this together for us. I look forward to diving in and typing it up, and I'll be sharing it shortly. But I can only validate what Richard said earlier on. He is generous with his time and quite friendly. So do reach out also directly to Julian to continue the conversation. Don't be a stranger. Thank you, Richard. That's all we had.
So I can stay on if you want for like a quick thing at the end where I just explain the slides. And then if you want me to answer questions, I can, or we can wrap, whatever your preference is. And we can always do that offline.
Here, and then we'll connect soon. I'll send you a draft and we'll take it from there.
Perfect. Thanks so much, everyone, for your time.